close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world without glass. No windows to let in the morning light. No mirrors to reflect your face. No spectacles to sharpen a blurry horizon. No light bulbs glowing warmly in the evening dark. It is almost impossible to imagine such a world, isn't it? And yet, for most of human history, this was the reality. Glass, as we know it, did not exist. Tonight, as you settle in and let your body grow heavy and warm, we are going to journey together through one of humanity's most remarkable stories. It is the story of how we learned to transform sand and fire into something magical. Something that could hold wine, or capture starlight, or show us our own reflection for the very first time. This is the history of glassmaking, and it begins, as so many great stories do, with an accident. The ancient Roman writer Pliny the Elder tells us a tale, one that has been repeated for centuries. Long ago, he says, Phoenician merchants traveling along the coast of what is now Lebanon stopped to make camp on a sandy beach. They needed to cook their evening meal, but they could find no stones to support their cooking pots over the fire. So they used blocks of natron instead, a mineral salt they were carrying as cargo. As the fire burned through the night, something strange happened. The intense heat fused the natron with the sand beneath it, and in the morning, when the merchants raked through the ashes, they discovered something wondrous. Streams of a new, translucent substance had formed. It was glass. Now, historians today believe this story is more legend than fact. The temperatures required to make glass are far higher than any beach campfire could produce. But the story endures because it captures something true about the mystery of glass. It is born from the most common materials imaginable, sand and heat, yet it becomes something almost otherworldly. Something that can bend light. Something that can seem to hold the sky itself within its depths. Let us begin our journey properly now, traveling back in time to the very first glassmakers, to the ancient workshops of Mesopotamia and Egypt, where artisans discovered how to coax this magical material into being, and where the first glass objects, tiny beads of brilliant blue, began to change the world. The true origins of glassmaking lie not on a beach, but in the workshops of ancient Mesopotamia, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now modern-day Iraq and Syria. Here, sometime around 3500 BCE, perhaps even earlier, craftspeople stumbled upon the secret of making glass. We do not know exactly how it happened. Perhaps it was potters, firing their ceramic vessels in kilns, who noticed strange glassy deposits forming on the surface of their work. Perhaps it was metalworkers, smelting copper ore, who observed that certain fluxes produced a glassy slag. Whatever the circumstances, someone, somewhere, realized that this strange, shiny substance could be made deliberately. And a new craft was born. The earliest glass objects were not vessels or windows. They were beads. Tiny, precious beads of deep blue, turquoise, and sometimes green. These colors came from copper compounds mixed into the glass, and they were intended to imitate something even more valuable. Lapis lazuli and turquoise, the precious stones that adorned the jewelry of kings and queens. Glass, you see, was never meant to be ordinary. From its very beginning, it was a material of imitation and aspiration. It could pretend to be something rare and expensive. A merchant who could not afford true lapis lazuli could wear glass beads that sparkled with the same deep blue. A noblewoman who coveted turquoise earrings could adorn herself with glass that caught the light in just the same way. Glass, breathe deeply now, and let yourself drift back to those ancient workshops. Imagine the heat of the kilns, the smell of smoke and burning fuel. Imagine the craftspeople, their faces illuminated by the glow of molten material, carefully shaping tiny beads on the ends of copper rods. Each bead required patience and skill. Each bead was a small miracle of transformation. By around 1500 BCE, the craft of glassmaking had spread to Egypt, and there it flourished spectacularly. The Egyptians were already masters of many crafts, of goldsmithing and stoneworking, of textile weaving and ceramic making. They embraced glass with enthusiasm, and they elevated it to an art form. Egyptian glassmakers developed new techniques. They learned to shape glass not just into beads, but into small vessels, perfume bottles, and cosmetic containers. These were precious objects owned only by the wealthy and powerful. They were found in the tombs of pharaohs and nobles, buried alongside gold and jewels to accompany their owners into the afterlife. One technique the Egyptians perfected was called core forming. Picture this. A glassmaker shapes a core of clay and dung around a metal rod, molding it into the shape of a tiny vessel. Then, while the core is still supported on the rod, the craftsperson wraps trails of molten glass around it, building up layers of color, swirling patterns of blue and white and yellow. When the glass cools and hardens, the core is carefully scraped out, leaving behind a hollow vessel, its walls thin as eggshells, decorated with feathered patterns that seem to flow like water. These core-formed vessels were tiny, rarely more than a few inches tall. But they were objects of extraordinary beauty, and they held something equally precious. Perfumed oils and unguents, the luxuries that Egyptian nobles used to anoint their skin and scent their hair. To hold such a vessel in your hand was to hold wealth and artistry and fragrance all at once. The colors of Egyptian glass were remarkable. Deep cobalt blue, made with copper and cobalt compounds. Turquoise, achieved through careful control of the copper content. Brilliant white, opaque and creamy. Rich yellow, colored with lead and antimony. And sometimes, though rarely, a deep wine-dark red, one of the most difficult colors to achieve, made with copper under very specific conditions. Let yourself imagine these colors now, glowing in the Egyptian sun. Imagine a queen lifting a tiny flask to her nose, inhaling the scent of lotus and myrrh. Imagine the light catching the swirled patterns on the glass, the blues and whites flowing together like the waters of the Nile. This was glass in its infancy, already beautiful, already treasured, already transforming the world. For centuries, glassmaking remained a closely guarded secret. The knowledge passed from master to apprentice, from father to son, from workshop to workshop, but always within tight circles of trust. Glassmakers were specialists, set apart from other craftspeople by the mysterious nature of their art. They worked with fire and sand, with strange mineral compounds, and they produced objects that seemed to defy the natural order of things. Think about how glass must have appeared to ordinary people in the ancient world. Here was a material that was solid yet could shatter like ice. It was made from sand, the most common substance on earth, yet it could become as clear as water, as blue as the sky, could hold liquid without absorbing it, could be shaped while hot and would hold that shape forever once cooled. In an age before chemistry, before anyone understood the molecular structure of matter, glass must have seemed genuinely magical. And so the glassmakers kept their secrets. They developed their own vocabulary, their own methods, their own rituals. The recipes for colored glass were especially precious. How much copper to add for blue? How to achieve that perfect turquoise? What minerals produced green or yellow or the rare and valuable red? These formulas were trade secrets, valuable enough to kill for, valuable enough to protect with one's life. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, glassmaking was often associated with royal workshops. Kings and pharaohs employed glassmakers just as they employed jewelers and metalworkers, keeping them close, ensuring their loyalty, controlling access to their products. Glass was too valuable, too important to be left to ordinary commerce. But secrets have a way of escaping. By the late Bronze Age, around 1400 BCE, glassmaking knowledge had spread across the ancient Mediterranean world. We find glass objects in Cyprus and Greece, in Anatolia and the Levant. Trade routes carried not just finished glass products, but also raw glass ingots in various colors that could be remelted and shaped by craftspeople far from the original workshops. One of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of glass from this period comes from a shipwreck. The Uluburun wreck, found off the coast of Turkey, dates to around 1300 BCE. Among its cargo of copper ingots, tin, ebony, and ivory, archaeologists discovered over 100 glass ingots. Most were a deep cobalt blue, though some were turquoise and others a pale purple blue. These ingots were raw material, destined for workshops where they would be melted down and transformed into beads, vessels, and ornaments. The ship had set sail from somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, perhaps from the Levantine coast or Cyprus. Its destination remains unknown, for it never arrived. But its cargo tells us that glass was already, by this time, an international commodity. It was being produced in some places, transported across the sea, and worked into finished products in others. The glass trade was born. Let your mind drift now, out across the wine-dark sea of the ancient Mediterranean. Imagine a merchant vessel, its sail catching the evening breeze, its hold filled with precious cargo. Imagine the glass ingots packed in straw, deep blue and turquoise, waiting to be transformed into objects of beauty. Somewhere ahead lies a port, a workshop, a craftsperson whose hands will shape these raw materials into something new. The journey of glass has begun, a journey that will eventually span the entire world. Dark Ages and continuity. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed. Cities were destroyed, trade networks shattered, writing systems were forgotten. Historians call this period the Bronze Age collapse, and it was one of the most dramatic civilizational breakdowns in human history. Egypt weakened. The Hittite Empire vanished entirely. Mycenaean Greece fell into a dark age that would last for centuries. What happened to glassmaking during this turbulent time? The evidence suggests that production continued, but on a much smaller scale. The great royal workshops may have closed, but the knowledge survived. Glassmakers continued their craft in scattered locations, keeping the flame alive through generations of uncertainty. By around 900 BCE, glassmaking was flourishing again, particularly in the coastal cities of Phoenicia, in what is now Lebanon. The Phoenicians were the great merchants and seafarers of the ancient world, and they recognized the value of glass. They established workshops in cities like Tyre and Sidon, and they carried glass products, along with their famous purple dye, to ports throughout the Mediterranean. It was the Phoenicians who brought glass to the Greeks and to the Western Mediterranean. It was Phoenician craftspeople who spread the techniques of core forming and bead-making to new regions. And it was from the Phoenician coast, centuries later, that the most revolutionary discovery in the history of glass would emerge. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let us rest in the quiet centuries between the Bronze Age collapse and the rise of Rome. Let us imagine the small workshops where glassmakers tended their furnaces, preserving their craft through difficult times. Let us honor the continuity of knowledge, the passing of secrets from hand to hand, the patient preservation of an art that would one day change everything. Sometime around the 1st century BCE, in the region of Syria-Palestine, someone picked up a hollow iron tube, dipped it into a pot of molten glass, and blew. A bubble formed, and in that simple act, everything changed. The invention of glassblowing was one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. It transformed glass from a rare luxury into an everyday material. It made possible objects that had never existed before. And it set the stage for all the glass innovations that would follow, from Roman drinking cups to medieval cathedral windows to the mirrors and lenses and telescopes of the scientific revolution. Before glassblowing, every glass vessel had to be laboriously shaped by hand. Core forming took hours of painstaking work to produce a single small flask. Casting glass into molds was faster, but the results were heavy and thick-walled. Glass remained expensive, a material for the wealthy few. Glassblowing changed everything. A skilled glassblower could produce a vessel in minutes rather than hours. The walls could be thin, the shapes varied, the sizes much larger than anything possible before. Suddenly, glass could be made quickly, cheaply, and in enormous quantities. Suddenly, glass could be for everyone. Close your eyes and imagine the moment of discovery. Perhaps it was an accident, a craftsperson experimenting with a new tool. Perhaps it was a moment of inspiration, a sudden realization that air could shape glass from within. We will never know who first blew that bubble, whose breath first transformed molten glass into a hollow sphere. But we know that moment changed the world. The basic technique of glassblowing has remained essentially unchanged for 2,000 years. A glassblower gathers a blob of molten glass on the end of a hollow iron pipe, called a blowpipe. By blowing gently through the pipe while rotating it to keep the glass centered, the glassblower inflates the glass into a bubble. This bubble can then be shaped, using tools and gravity and the glassblower's skill, into almost any form imaginable. The Romans, who controlled the Eastern Mediterranean when glassblowing was invented, recognized the potential immediately. They embraced the new technology and spread it throughout their empire. Roman glassmakers established workshops in Italy, in Gaul, in Spain, in the Rhineland. Glass vessels became common household items. Wine cups and storage jars, perfume bottles and oil lamps, bowls and plates and goblets, all flowed from the workshops of Roman glassmakers. And as you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine those Roman workshops, the heat of the furnaces, the glow of molten glass, the gentle breath that transforms sand into something beautiful. The art of glassblowing is an art of breath and fire, of human skill meeting elemental forces. It is an art that continues to this day, practiced by craftspeople around the world, connecting us across 2 millennia to those first anonymous innovators who discovered that a simple breath could change everything. Rest now, and let the warmth of those ancient furnaces lull you toward dreams. When we continue, we will follow glass on its journey through the Roman Empire and beyond, watching as it becomes ever more sophisticated, ever more beautiful, ever more central to human civilization. But for now, sleep. Let the story settle into your mind like sand settling through water. The history of glass is long, and there is so much more to tell. The Roman Empire, at its height, stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of Syria, from the forests of Germania to the fertile banks of the Nile. And throughout this vast domain, glass flowed like water. It filled the markets of Rome and the shops of provincial towns. It graced the tables of emperors and the humble homes of common citizens. Glass had become, for the first time in history, a truly democratic material. Let us wander now through a Roman city, perhaps Pompeii before the fateful eruption, or bustling Alexandria, or Rome itself in its golden age. The streets are alive with commerce, and everywhere we look, we see glass. A merchant displays rows of pale green bottles, each one perfect for storing wine or olive oil. A perfume seller arranges delicate flasks of deep blue and amber, their contents precious and fragrant. A household slave carries a tray of drinking cups, their surfaces catching the Mediterranean light. The colors of Roman glass were often subtle, gentle greens and blues that came naturally from the iron impurities in the sand. These were the colors of everyday glass, the glass that ordinary people could afford. But the wealthy demanded more. They commissioned glass in vivid colors, deep cobalt blue, rich amber, opaque white, even glass that layered multiple colors together, carved into intricate patterns like the famous cameo vessels. The most celebrated of these luxury pieces was the Portland vase, a masterwork of cameo glass that survives to this day. 2 layers of glass, deep blue beneath and white above, were fused together and then carved by a master craftsman. The white layer was cut away to reveal the blue beneath, creating figures and scenes of extraordinary delicacy. Gods and mortals, trees and serpents, emerged from the surface like a 3-dimensional painting. It was glass transformed into fine art, a material once used only for simple beads now capable of rivaling the finest sculpture. But it was not only luxury glass that flourished in the Roman world. The true revolution was in quantity and accessibility. Roman glassmakers developed new techniques for mass production. They blew glass into molds, creating identical vessels quickly and cheaply. They standardized shapes and sizes, making glass containers that could be easily stacked and transported. They created glass that was practical and affordable, glass for everyday use. And here, in the Roman world, we encounter something truly revolutionary. For the first time in history, people began to put glass in their windows. Before the Romans, windows were simply openings in walls. They might be covered with wooden shutters, or with oiled cloth or animal skins that let in some light while keeping out the wind. But they could never be both open to light and closed to the elements at the same time. You could see out or you could stay warm, but rarely both. Roman glassmakers changed this. They developed a technique for creating flat panes of glass, probably by blowing a large bubble, cutting it open, and spinning it flat while still hot. The resulting panes were small by modern standards, often no more than a foot across, and they were not perfectly clear. They had a greenish tint, and their surfaces rippled and warped, but they let in light, and they kept out the cold. Imagine what this must have meant. For the first time, A room could be bright even when the shutters were closed. Sunlight could stream through a window without bringing in rain or snow or bitter winter wind. The wealthy Romans who installed glass in their villas must have marveled at this miracle. Light without cold. Vision without exposure. A new way of living. The Romans installed window glass in their bathhouses, where warmth was essential and steam would fog any opening. They used it in their heated rooms, preserving the warmth generated by their hypocaust systems. They glazed the windows of their grand villas, letting Mediterranean light flood into spaces that would once have been dim and shadowy. Archaeologists have found window glass at Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserved by the same volcanic ash that destroyed those cities. They have found it in Roman Britain, in the grand bath complexes that the Romans built even in that cold and rainy land. The Romans carried glass windows to the edges of their world, bringing light to places where darkness had once ruled. Rest your eyes now, and imagine yourself in a Roman room. The afternoon light slants through a window of pale green glass, casting soft patterns on the mosaic floor. Outside, you can see the blurred shapes of trees, the movement of clouds across the sky. But in here, it is warm and quiet. The glass holds back the world while letting in its beauty. This is what the Romans gave us. This is the beginning of the windowed world we live in today. When the Roman Empire fell, the world changed. Trade routes collapsed. Cities shrank. The great workshops that had supplied glass to millions fell silent. In Western Europe, glassmaking nearly disappeared, surviving only in scattered monasteries and isolated communities. But in the East, in the lands that would become the Islamic world, the art of glass not only survived but flourished as never before. The rise of Islam in the 7th century created a new civilization that stretched from Spain to Central Asia. It was a civilization of scholars and poets, of astronomers and mathematicians, of architects and artists. And it was a civilization that embraced glass with passion and creativity. Islamic glassmakers inherited the techniques of the Romans and the Persians, but they did not merely preserve this knowledge. They transformed it. They developed new methods, new forms, new decorations. They pushed the art of glass in directions that the ancient world had never imagined. One of the great innovations of Islamic glassmaking was the perfection of enameled and gilded glass. Imagine a glass vessel, its surface painted with intricate designs in vibrant colors, then fired again to fuse the enamel to the glass. Imagine gold leaf applied in delicate patterns, gleaming against backgrounds of deep blue or rich green. These techniques created objects of breathtaking beauty, worthy of the most powerful caliphs and sultans. The mosque lamps of the Islamic world are among the most beautiful glass objects ever created. These large vessels, designed to hold oil and a wick, hung from the ceilings of mosques throughout the Islamic lands. They were covered with enameled inscriptions, verses from the Quran rendered in flowing Arabic calligraphy. When lit, they transformed their surroundings, casting colored light across the walls and floors, creating an atmosphere of sacred beauty. Close your eyes and imagine a great mosque at evening prayer. Hundreds of glass lamps hang from chains, their flames flickering inside vessels of blue and gold and green. The light dances across the carpeted floors, across the faces of the faithful, across the intricate geometric patterns of the walls. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the sound of chanting. This is glass not merely as craft, but as an instrument of devotion, a way of bringing heaven's light into earthly spaces. But the Islamic contribution to glass was not only artistic. It was also scientific. The scholars of the Islamic world were fascinated by light, by optics, by the way that glass could bend and focus rays of illumination. And their investigations would eventually change the world. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the great physicist Ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as Alhazen, conducted revolutionary experiments on the nature of light and vision. Working in Cairo, he studied how light passes through transparent materials, how it bends when it enters glass or water, how lenses can magnify or diminish what we see. His book of optics became the foundation for all later study of light, influencing scientists from Roger Bacon to Johannes Kepler. Ibn al-Haytham worked with glass instruments, with curved surfaces that could focus light. He understood that the shape of a piece of glass determined how it affected the rays passing through it. He was laying the groundwork, though he did not know it, for the spectacles and telescopes and microscopes that would transform human understanding of the universe. Islamic chemists, too, worked with glass. They developed new types of glass for their alchemical experiments, vessels that could withstand heat and chemical reactions. They created the alembic, a glass still used for distillation, which would become essential to the development of chemistry and medicine. They understood glass not just as a material for beautiful objects, but as a tool for understanding nature itself. The Islamic world was a bridge between ancient and modern. It preserved the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans, translated it, studied it, and added to it. When this knowledge flowed back into Western Europe, carried by traders and scholars and crusaders, it would spark a revolution in thought and technology. And glass, humble glass, would be at the heart of that revolution. Let your thoughts drift now across the medieval world, across deserts and mountains and seas. Imagine the caravans carrying glass and knowledge along the Silk Road. Imagine the ships sailing between Alexandria and Venice, their holds filled with precious cargo. Imagine the ideas flowing from one civilization to another, the slow accumulation of understanding that would eventually bring us to our modern world. Glass was part of that flow, a thread in the tapestry of human progress. In medieval Europe, as the first millennium gave way to the second, something remarkable began to happen. Churches began to grow, not just in size, though they grew in size too, but in height, in ambition, in their reach toward the heavens. Stone walls that had been thick and heavy became thin and pierced with openings. And into those openings went glass, colored glass, glass that transformed sunlight into something that seemed touched by the divine. Stained glass. The very phrase evokes mystery and beauty. Windows that tell stories in light and color, that turn the interior of a building into something otherworldly, something sacred. The medieval cathedral, with its soaring stone arches and its walls of luminous glass, represents one of humanity's greatest achievements in architecture. And glass, colored glass, was essential to its vision. The techniques for making colored glass had been known since ancient times, but the medieval craftsmen of Europe developed them to new heights of sophistication. They learned to add different metallic oxides to molten glass to create a palette of colors. Cobalt for deep blue, copper for green and red, manganese for purple, gold, dissolved in the molten glass, for a ruby red of extraordinary depth and richness. The glass was blown into cylinders, then cut and flattened while still hot. It was not uniform, this medieval glass. Each piece had its own character, its own variations in thickness and color. There were bubbles and striations, ripples and waves. And these imperfections were not flaws. They were gifts. They made the glass come alive when light passed through it, shimmering and dancing in ways that perfectly uniform modern glass cannot match. The pieces of colored glass were then assembled into windows, held together by strips of lead. Skilled craftsmen painted details onto the glass, faces and hands, folds of cloth, the features of saints and angels. These painted lines were fixed by firing, fusing them permanently to the surface of the glass. The result was a window that was also a painting, a wall that was also a story, a barrier that was also a portal to another world. Imagine yourself now in a great Gothic cathedral. It is the 12th century, perhaps, or the 13th. The building around you is vast, its stone columns rising like trees in a petrified forest, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow far above. But you are not looking at the stone. You are looking at the light. The windows blaze with color. Deep blues that seem to hold the night sky within them. Reds that burn like fire, like the blood of martyrs. Greens like spring leaves, like the gardens of paradise. And through these colors, filtered and transformed, comes the sunlight, filling the vast interior with a glow that seems to come from another world entirely. The windows tell stories. Here is Christ in majesty, surrounded by angels. There is the Virgin Mary, her blue robe echoing the blue of the glass itself. Saints and prophets, kings and peasants, demons and monsters, all rendered in light and color. For the medieval worshipper, most of whom could not read, these windows were books written in a universal language. They taught the stories of the Bible, the lives of the saints, the promise of salvation. Chartres Cathedral, built in the 12th and 13th centuries, contains over 150 stained glass windows. Together, they form one of the most complete medieval glass collections in the world. The famous blue of Chartres, a particular shade achieved by medieval craftsmen and never quite duplicated since, gives the interior a quality of otherworldly luminosity. Standing inside Chartres on a sunny day is an experience that transcends time, a direct connection to the medieval world and its vision of the sacred. The theology of the time saw light as a manifestation of divine presence. God was light and light was good, and the more light that could enter a church, the more of God's presence it could contain. The Gothic architects pushed this idea to its limits, creating buildings that were more glass than stone, walls that seemed to dissolve into color and radiance. Stained glass was not merely decoration. It was theology made visible, faith made luminous. Let the colors wash over you now as you drift toward sleep. Deep blue, like the depths of the ocean or the dome of the night sky. Ruby red, warm and glowing. Emerald green, cool and peaceful. These colors have been shining through cathedral windows for 800 years and more, telling their stories to generation after generation. They are still telling them now, to anyone who enters those sacred spaces and lifts their eyes to the light. Rest now, and let the light of those ancient windows fill your dreams. When we continue our journey, we will travel to Venice, the island city that would become the glassmaking capital of the world. We will meet the master craftsmen of Murano, learn the secrets they guarded with their lives, and watch as they created glass of unparalleled beauty. But for now, sleep. Let the colors of medieval glass paint your dreams in shades of blue and, in the shallow waters of a lagoon on the northeastern coast of Italy, a city rose from the sea. Venice, La Serenissima, the most serene republic. Built on wooden pilings driven into the mud, connected by canals instead of streets, Venice was unlike any other city in the world. And it was here, in this improbable place, that glassmaking would reach its greatest heights. Venice had been making glass since at least the 10th century, drawing on traditions inherited from the Roman world and enriched by contact with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic East. Venetian merchants traveled everywhere, and they brought back not just goods but knowledge, techniques, secrets whispered in the souks of Damascus and the workshops of Constantinople. Venice became a crucible where East and West combined. But glass furnaces are dangerous things. They burn hot, day and night, and the buildings of medieval Venice were made of wood. Fires were a constant threat, and glassmaking furnaces had started more than their share. So in 1291, the Venetian authorities made a fateful decision. All glassmaking furnaces would be moved to the island of Murano, a mile across the lagoon from Venice itself. This exile was meant as a safety measure, a way to protect the city from fire. But it had consequences that no one could have predicted. Concentrated together on their small island, the glassmakers of Murano formed a community unlike any other. They lived together, worked together, married each other's daughters, and trained each other's sons. They competed fiercely, but they also cooperated, sharing discoveries and pushing each other to ever greater achievements. Murano became a place apart, a world unto itself. The glassmakers were granted special privileges. They could wear swords like noblemen. Their daughters could marry into the aristocracy without losing their noble status. But there was a price for these privileges. The glassmakers were forbidden to leave. Their knowledge was too valuable, too dangerous to let escape. A glassmaker who tried to flee Murano, to take his secrets to a foreign land, could be hunted down and killed. Let yourself drift now to that island in the lagoon. Imagine the narrow streets, the small houses clustered around the great glass furnaces. Imagine the heat shimmering above the workshops, the glow of molten glass visible through open doorways. Imagine the sound of the glassblowers at work, the hiss of breath through iron pipes, the soft ringing of tools against cooling glass. This was Murano, the island of glass, where masters performed their daily miracles. The glassmakers of Murano were not content with what had been achieved before. They were artists and innovators, constantly experimenting, constantly seeking new effects, new techniques, new kinds of beauty. And in the 15th century, they achieved something that had eluded glassmakers for thousands of years. They made glass that was truly clear. Before this breakthrough, glass had always had some color. The iron impurities in ordinary sand gave it a greenish or brownish tint. Even the finest Roman glass had a faint color when you looked through it. But the Venetian masters, through careful selection of materials and precise control of their processes, learned to remove these impurities. They called their creation cristallo, crystal glass, because it was as clear as rock crystal, the natural mineral that had long been prized for its transparency. Cristallo was a revelation. For the first time, glass could be truly invisible, a window that did not tint or distort what you saw through it. Vessels made of cristallo seemed to hold nothing but air, their contents floating in empty space. Light passed through cristallo unchanged, neither colored nor dimmed. It was as close to pure transparency as human hands had ever achieved. The secret lay in the ingredients and the process. The Venetians used pure quartz pebbles from the rivers of northern Italy instead of ordinary sand. They purified their soda ash with painstaking care. They added manganese dioxide, which they called glassmaker's soap, to neutralize the remaining iron impurities. And they controlled their furnaces with precision, maintaining temperatures that melted the glass completely while avoiding the conditions that would introduce new defects. Cristallo made Venice famous throughout Europe. Kings and nobles competed to own Venetian glassware. The finest pieces commanded prices that would buy a house or a ship, and the secret of cristallo was guarded with fierce jealousy. Anyone caught sharing the recipe with foreigners faced severe punishment. Venice had created something precious, and it intended to keep the monopoly for itself. Imagine holding a goblet of cristallo in your hands. It weighs almost nothing, this miracle of sand and fire. The light passes through it undimmed, and you can see your fingers through the glass as clearly as through empty air. The walls are thin as paper, yet strong enough to hold wine. When you tap it gently, it rings with a clear, pure note, like a tiny bell. This is what the masters of Murano created 500 years ago, and we are still marveling at their achievement today. Before we tell the story of the glass mirror, let us pause to consider what came before. How did people see themselves in the ages before mirrors as we know them? The first mirrors were pools of still water, a quiet pond, a basin filled for washing, the surface of a river on a windless day. Our ancestors saw themselves in these natural mirrors, their faces wavering and uncertain, easily disturbed by a breath of wind or a falling leaf. To see yourself in water was to see yourself impermanently, a reflection that could vanish in an instant. Then came mirrors of polished metal. Bronze mirrors appeared in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, discs of metal polished to a high shine. Later came mirrors of silver and steel, each one laboriously buffed until it could return an image. But metal mirrors were never perfect. They tarnished quickly, requiring constant polishing. Their reflections were dim and slightly colored, bronze giving a warm tint, silver a cooler one. And they were expensive, affordable only by the wealthy. The Romans knew that glass could be made reflective by backing it with metal. They created small mirrors by blowing glass spheres, then coating the inside with lead or tin. But these mirrors were curved, distorting the image, and they were small, showing only a portion of the face at a time. True flat glass mirrors, mirrors that could show you your whole self without distortion, remained beyond reach. The challenge was technical. A mirror requires glass that is perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, perfectly clear. It requires a coating of reflective metal applied evenly across the entire surface. And it requires that the glass and metal bond together without bubbles, gaps, or imperfections. Each of these requirements pushed the limits of what was possible. It would take the masters of Murano to solve them all. In the 16th century, the glassmakers of Murano achieved what had been sought for centuries. They created the flat glass mirror, and in doing so, they changed how humanity saw itself. The technique was ingenious. The Venetian masters blew a large cylinder of their finest cristallo glass. While still hot, they cut this cylinder open along its length and laid it flat on a smooth surface, where it settled into a sheet of remarkable evenness. The glass was then polished to perfect smoothness and backed with an amalgam of tin and mercury, a reflective coating that adhered to the glass and returned light with brilliant clarity. The result was magical. For the first time in history, a person could see themselves as others saw them, full-sized, undistorted, in perfect detail. Every feature was visible. Every expression could be studied. The mirror showed truth, or what seemed like truth, a faithful reproduction of reality. Venetian mirrors became the most coveted luxury in Europe. They were fabulously expensive, costing as much as a small estate. Kings and queens purchased them for their palaces. Noble families displayed them as signs of wealth and sophistication. A single large mirror was worth more than paintings by the greatest masters. The French King Louis XIV desired mirrors above all things. He wanted them for his new palace at Versailles, wanted them in quantities that would bankrupt his treasury if he had to buy them from Venice. So he did something audacious. He sent agents to Murano to bribe glassmakers, to lure them away from their island prison with promises of wealth and protection. It was industrial espionage on a grand scale, and it succeeded. Several Murano masters defected to France, bringing their secrets with them. They established a mirror factory at Saint-Gobain, and soon France was producing its own mirrors, breaking Venice's monopoly forever. The Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, completed in 1684, displayed 357 mirrors, each one a triumph of French glassmaking. It was a declaration that Venice no longer ruled the world of glass. Let your eyes close now, and imagine yourself in that hall of mirrors. 17 great arched windows face 17 great arched mirrors, and the light bounces between them endlessly, multiplying itself, filling the vast gallery with brilliance. Chandeliers drip with crystal, their flames reflected 1,000 times. Courtiers in silk and velvet move through this space of infinite reflection, their images repeating into the distance. This is what glass had become, a material that could multiply light, multiply space, multiply reality itself. While Venice was perfecting the art of decorative glass, something else was happening in the workshops of Europe. Craftspeople were learning to grind and polish glass into precise shapes, curves that could bend light in controlled ways. They were creating lenses, and lenses were about to transform human understanding of the universe. The story begins, as so many stories do, with aging eyes. Sometime in the late 13th century, probably in northern Italy, craftspeople developed the first spectacles. These were simple convex lenses, thicker in the middle than at the edges, which helped farsighted readers see text more clearly. We do not know who invented them, only that by 1300 they were being produced in Florence and Venice, transforming the lives of scholars and scribes whose eyes had begun to fail. Think about what this meant. Before spectacles, a scholar's productive life ended when their eyesight faded. Decades of accumulated knowledge became locked away, inaccessible, as the words on the page blurred into illegibility. But spectacles gave back those lost years. An elderly monk could continue copying manuscripts. An aging philosopher could keep reading and writing. Knowledge could accumulate across a longer lifetime, and the pace of learning quickened. Concave lenses, thinner in the middle than at the edges, came later, helping the nearsighted see distant objects clearly. By the 16th century, spectacles were common throughout Europe, sold by traveling peddlers and established merchants alike. They were among the first products of what we might call consumer technology, devices that ordinary people could buy to improve their daily lives. But lenses could do more than correct aging vision. They could extend vision beyond its natural limits, showing things too small or too far away for the naked eye to see. And in the early 17th century, craftspeople in the Netherlands made a discovery that would change everything. By combining lenses in a tube, they created instruments that could make distant objects appear close. The telescope was born. In 1609, a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua heard rumors of a new invention from the Netherlands, a device that could make distant things appear near. His name was Galileo Galilei, and he was about to become the most famous scientist in the world. Galileo did not invent the telescope, but he perfected it. Working from descriptions alone, he built his own instruments, grinding the lenses himself, experimenting with different combinations of convex and concave glass. Within months, he had created a telescope far more powerful than anything that had existed before, capable of magnifying objects 20 times. and then he turned it toward the sky. What Galileo saw through his glass lenses overturned 2,000 years of astronomical belief. The moon was not a perfect sphere but a rugged world of mountains and craters. The Milky Way was not a cloud but a vast river of individual stars too numerous to count. Venus showed phases like the moon, proof that it orbited the sun. And Jupiter, the great wandering star, had companions of its own, for moons that circled it in stately procession. The moons of Jupiter were the key. Here was proof, visible through the telescope, that not everything in the heavens revolved around the Earth. Here was a miniature solar system, a model of what Copernicus had proposed for our own sun and planets. The old Earth-centered universe, accepted since the time of the ancient Greeks, began to crumble. Glass had shown humanity its true place in the cosmos. Galileo published his discoveries in a book called The Starry Messenger, and it caused a sensation throughout Europe. Princes and scholars clamored for telescopes of their own. A new age of astronomy began, an age of ever larger telescopes with ever more perfect lenses, each one revealing more wonders in the depths of space. And it was all made possible by glass. Simple glass, sand transformed by fire, shaped and polished by human hands into curves that could gather the faint light of distant worlds. Without glass, Galileo could not have seen the moons of Jupiter. Without glass, we might still believe that the Earth stood motionless at the center of all things. The scientific revolution was, in many ways, a revolution of glass. Let yourself drift now among the stars that Galileo saw. Imagine the cold light of Jupiter, the tiny points of its moons arranged in a line. Imagine the craters of our own moon, sharp-edged in the darkness. Imagine the countless stars of the Milky Way, each one a sun, perhaps with worlds of its own. Glass opened this universe to human eyes, and we are still exploring it today, with telescopes that Galileo could never have imagined, but that work on the same principles he discovered for centuries ago. While Galileo was turning his telescope toward the stars, other investigators were pointing their lenses in a different direction. They were looking not outward but inward, not at the vastness of space but at the tiny world that exists beneath our notice. They were inventing the microscope, and what they found would revolutionize our understanding of life itself. The microscope emerged in the Netherlands around the same time as the telescope, in the early 17th century. The same optical principles applied, lenses that could bend light and magnify images. But while the telescope gathered light from distant objects, the microscope concentrated light on objects close at hand, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. The first microscopists were astonished by what they saw. A flea, that tiny pest that plagued every household, became a monster of terrifying complexity. Its armored body covered with spines and bristles, its legs equipped with claws and hooks. A fly's eye, no bigger than a pinhead, revealed itself as a honeycomb of thousands of individual lenses. The edge of a razor, seemingly smooth, proved to be rough and jagged as a saw blade. In England, Robert Hooke published his masterpiece Micrographia in 1665, filled with stunning illustrations of the microscopic world. He drew fleas and lice in intricate detail. He showed the structure of feathers and the scales on fish. And in one famous observation, he examined a thin slice of cork and saw that it was composed of countless tiny compartments, which he called cells, because they reminded him of the small rooms where monks lived. Hooke had discovered the basic unit of life, though he did not yet understand what he had found. But the greatest of the early microscopists was a Dutch draper named Antony van Leeuwenhoek. Working alone in the city of Delft, grinding his own tiny lenses with obsessive precision, Leeuwenhoek created microscopes more powerful than any that had existed before. His lenses were small, some no bigger than a grain of rice, but they could magnify objects over 200 times, revealing a world that no human had ever seen. In 1674, Antony van Leeuwenhoek looked through one of his tiny lenses at a drop of pond water, and he saw something that changed everything. The water was alive. Swimming through it were creatures so small that thousands could fit in a single drop, creatures that no one had ever seen before, creatures that Leeuwenhoek called animalcules, little animals. We know them today as microorganisms, bacteria and protozoa, the teeming invisible life that fills every drop of water, every pinch of soil, every breath of air. But to Leeuwenhoek, they were a revelation. Here was proof that life existed on scales far smaller than anyone had imagined, that the world was far more crowded with living things than the naked eye could see. Leeuwenhoek spent the rest of his long life exploring this hidden world. He examined everything he could find: water from rain barrels and canals, scrapings from his own teeth, the blood of fish and frogs, the seeds of plants, the legs of insects. Everywhere he looked, he found wonders, and he shared his discoveries with the world through hundreds of letters to the Royal Society of London, each one describing new marvels seen through his glass lenses. Imagine being Leeuwenhoek, peering through a lens smaller than a pea at a drop of water from a nearby pond. The light catches the sample just right, and suddenly the water comes alive. Tiny shapes dart and spin, creatures with tails that whip back and forth, round bodies that pulse and contract, chains of spheres that drift slowly through the liquid. You are seeing something that no human being has ever seen before, a universe in a droplet, life at its smallest scale. The microscope opened a door to a world we had never suspected existed. It would eventually reveal the causes of disease, the structure of cells, the mechanisms of life itself. All of this came from glass, from tiny lenses ground with patience and skill, from the same material that had made beads and bottles and windows. Glass had shown us the stars. Now it showed us the building blocks of our own bodies. Let your mind shrink now, down through the scales of existence. Pass through the world of fleas and flies, past the dust motes that float in sunbeams, down to the realm of cells and microbes. This is the world that glass revealed, a world of infinite complexity hidden within the ordinary. Every drop of water is an ocean. Every grain of soil is a continent. And we know this only because someone learned to shape sand into lenses that could show us what our eyes could never see. For centuries, Venice had dominated the world of fine glass. But in the late 17th century, a new challenger emerged from an unlikely place. England, that rainy northern island, would transform the art of glassmaking and create a material of unprecedented brilliance. The story begins with a problem. England had been importing fine glass from Venice, but wars and trade disputes made this increasingly difficult and expensive. English glassmakers wanted to produce their own luxury glass, but they faced obstacles. They did not have access to the pure ingredients that the Venetians used. Their glass came out cloudy and dull, unable to compete with the famous Cristallo of Murano. The solution came from George Ravenscroft, a merchant and experimenter who had studied glassmaking in Venice. In the 1670s, working at his glasshouse in London, Ravenscroft developed a new formula. Instead of relying on the traditional ingredients, he added lead oxide to his glass mixture, a significant proportion of it, and the results were extraordinary. Lead glass, or lead crystal as it came to be known, had properties that no other glass could match. It was denser than ordinary glass with a satisfying weight in the hand. It was softer, easier to cut and engrave. But most remarkably, it had a refractive index higher than any glass before it, meaning that it bent light more dramatically, breaking white light into its component colors with spectacular effect. When light enters a piece of lead crystal, it slows and bends, and when it exits, it bends again. The different colors of light bend by slightly different amounts, spreading apart like a rainbow. This is why lead crystal sparkles so brilliantly, why it throws prismatic fire when the light catches it, why a chandelier of cut crystal seems to contain captured stars within its pendants. English lead crystal became famous throughout Europe. It was heavier than Venetian glass, less delicate, but it had a brilliance that nothing else could match. English craftsmen developed new techniques to exploit these properties. They cut deep facets into the glass, each one a surface that could catch and refract light. They created stemware and decanters, chandeliers and candelabra, all designed to maximize the play of light through the dense, sparkling material. The English innovations in glass came at a crucial moment in history. The 18th century was an age of expansion, of growing trade and increasing prosperity, at least for some. The middle classes were rising, and they wanted the luxuries that had once been reserved for the aristocracy. Glass was among those luxuries, and now it could be produced in quantities and at prices that made it accessible to a much wider market. English glass houses multiplied. Bristol became famous for its colored glass, deep blue and rich green and opaque white. Stourbridge in the Midlands developed as a center for cut crystal. Newcastle produced elegant wine glasses with delicate twisted stems. Each region developed its own specialties, its own traditions, its own styles. And glass found new uses beyond drinking vessels and chandeliers. Greenhouse glass allowed the wealthy to grow exotic plants even in the cool English climate. Window glass improved in quality and decreased in price, making glazed windows standard in middle-class homes rather than just the mansions of the rich. Bottles and jars made of glass transformed the storage and transport of food and drink. The wine bottle, in particular, was transformed during this period. Earlier bottles had been fragile and irregular, useful only for bringing wine from barrel to table. But English glassmakers developed stronger, darker bottles that could be sealed with cork and laid on their sides for aging. For the first time, wine could be stored for years, improving with age in its glass container. The great wines of Bordeaux and Burgundy owe their reputation partly to the English glass bottle. Let yourself drift now through an 18th century English house. In the dining room, candlelight sparkles through crystal glasses and dances across the polished table. In the parlor, tall windows let in the gray English daylight, their panes of glass keeping out the damp and cold. In the cellar, rows of dark bottles lie in quiet racks, their contents slowly maturing. And in the greenhouse, beyond the kitchen garden, tropical plants flourish behind walls of glass, creating a small paradise in this northern land. Glass was becoming woven into daily life, no longer a rare luxury but an expected part of a comfortable home. The transformation was gradual but profound. People began to take for granted things that their grandparents would have considered miracles. Clear windows, drinking glasses, mirrors in every room. The world was becoming a world of glass, and most people did not even notice the revolution happening around them. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the world began to change more rapidly than ever before. Steam engines powered new factories. Railways connected cities that had once been days apart. And in the glass industry, ancient methods that had endured for centuries began to give way to new techniques of mass production. For thousands of years, glassblowing had been the province of skilled craftsmen. Each piece was made by hand, shaped by human breath and human skill. A master glassblower might produce dozens of items in a day, each one unique, each one bearing the mark of its maker. But the industrial age demanded more. It demanded thousands of identical items, produced quickly and cheaply, to satisfy the growing appetites of an expanding population. The first great innovation was pressing. Instead of blowing glass into shape, manufacturers began pressing molten glass into metal molds using mechanical force. The technique had been used in a limited way for centuries, but in the 1820s, American glassmakers perfected it for mass production. A worker could place a gob of molten glass into a mold, pull a lever, and produce a finished object in seconds. Suddenly, glass tableware that had once been affordable only to the wealthy could be bought by almost anyone. Pressed glass filled the homes of the 19th century. Dishes and bowls, candlesticks and lamp bases, salt cellars and sugar bowls, all produced by the thousands in patterns that imitated cut crystal at a fraction of the cost. The designs had names like daisy and button, thumbprint, and sawtooth. They sparkled in the gaslight of Victorian parlors, bringing a touch of elegance to ordinary lives. But pressing was only the beginning. Engineers dreamed of automating the entire glassmaking process, of machines that could produce bottles and jars without any human touch at all. The challenge was immense. Glass is temperamental, sensitive to small changes in temperature and timing. The skills that glassblowers had developed over millennia were not easily translated into mechanical movements. The breakthrough came at the turn of the 20th century, with the invention of the automatic bottle-making machine. Michael Owens, an American inventor who had started his career as a child laborer in a glass factory, developed a machine that could produce bottles entirely without human intervention. His Owens automatic bottle machine, patented in 1903, was a marvel of mechanical engineering. The machine worked like this. A rotating arm dipped into a pool of molten glass, gathering a measured amount on a paste mold. Suction pulled the glass into a rough bottle shape. The bottle was then transferred to a finishing mold, where compressed air blew it into its final form. The entire process took seconds, and the machine could produce bottles continuously, day and night, needing only to be fed with raw materials and monitored for problems. The impact was revolutionary. Before the Owens machine, bottles were expensive enough that they were routinely returned, washed, and reused. A bottle of medicine or beer might be refilled dozens of times before it finally broke. But the machine made bottles so cheap that they became disposable. For the first time in history, glass containers could be thrown away after a single use. This transformation had consequences that extended far beyond the glass industry. Cheap bottles made possible the mass production of bottled beverages, from Coca-Cola to beer to milk. They enabled the pharmaceutical industry to package medicines safely and affordably. They changed how food was preserved and transported. The humble bottle, produced by the millions in automated factories, reshaped daily life in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate. And yet something was lost. The hand-blown bottles of earlier centuries, with their slight irregularities, their bubbles and swirls, their unique characters, gave way to perfect uniformity. Each machine-made bottle was identical to every other, interchangeable, anonymous. The craftsman's touch disappeared from everyday glass, replaced by mechanical precision. Let yourself rest now at this turning point in history. The old world of craftsmen and individual skill is fading. The new world of machines and mass production is rising. Glass, which had always been shaped by human breath and human hands, is now being made by iron and steel and steam. But the material itself remains the same, sand transformed by fire, transparent and beautiful and endlessly useful. The means of making it have changed, but its essential magic endures. Sleep now and dream of the great transformation. Dream of factories lit by flames, of machines that never tire, of bottles flowing like water from mechanical wombs. When we continue, we will see how glass conquered the modern world, how it gave us skyscrapers and automobiles, fiber optics and smartphone screens. But that is a story for later. For now, rest. The industrial age is only beginning, and there is so much more to come. Throughout history, one of the greatest challenges in glassmaking had been creating large, flat sheets. Windows remained small because large panes were nearly impossible to produce without distortion. The crown glass method, where a glassblower spun a molten disk until centrifugal force flattened it, could only produce circles of limited size, with a thick bullseye in the center where the blowing rod had been attached. The cylinder method, where a blown cylinder was cut and flattened, was better but still limited. What architects and builders dreamed of was plate glass, large sheets of perfectly flat, perfectly clear glass that could fill grand windows and create walls of light. The French had developed a technique in the late 17th century, casting molten glass onto flat tables and rolling it smooth with heavy iron cylinders. But the process was laborious and expensive, requiring extensive grinding and polishing to remove imperfections. Only the wealthiest could afford true plate glass. The 19th century brought improvements. Steam-powered machinery could grind and polish glass faster and more evenly than human hands. New furnace designs allowed larger quantities of glass to be melted at once. Gradually, the cost of plate glass fell, though it remained a luxury material, used for shop windows and the carriages of the wealthy, for mirrors and display cases. But even as plate glass became more available, no one had yet imagined what it could truly become. No one had dreamed of buildings made almost entirely of glass, structures that would dissolve the boundary between inside and outside, that would fill interior spaces with light as never before. That dream would require a visionary and a unique opportunity. In 1850, Britain announced plans for a great exhibition, a World's Fair to showcase the industrial achievements of all nations. A competition was held to design a building to house the exhibition in London's Hyde Park. Hundreds of designs were submitted, most of them conventional buildings of brick and stone. But one design was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Joseph Paxton was not an architect. He was a gardener, the head gardener at Chatsworth House, where he had designed and built the largest greenhouse in the world to house a collection of exotic plants, including the giant Victoria Amazonica water lily, He knew how to build with glass and iron, how to create structures that were light and airy yet strong enough to withstand the elements. Paxton's design for the Great Exhibition was revolutionary. He proposed a building made almost entirely of glass, supported by a framework of iron. It would be constructed from prefabricated, standardized parts that could be manufactured in factories and assembled on site. It would be temporary, designed to be taken down after the exhibition ended. And it would be vast, covering 19 acres, large enough to enclose the great elm trees of Hyde Park within its transparent walls. The building was constructed in an astonishing 9 months. Workers assembled nearly 1 million square feet of glass into a structure that rose like a crystalline mountain in the heart of London. The public called it the Crystal Palace, and the name captured perfectly the sense of wonder it inspired. Here was a building that seemed to be made of light itself, a fairy tale structure materialized in iron and glass. When the Great Exhibition opened on May 1, 1851, over 6 million people came to marvel at its wonders. They walked through halls flooded with daylight, past displays of machinery and art from around the world, beneath a roof that seemed to float unsupported above their heads. The elm trees, enclosed within the building, spread their branches toward a ceiling of glass. Sparrows flew through the interior, confused by a space that was somehow both inside and outside at once. The Crystal Palace proved what glass could do. It could create spaces of unprecedented openness and light. It could blur the boundaries between architecture and nature. It could transform our relationship with the outdoors, bringing the sky inside while keeping out the rain and cold. The Crystal Palace was a prophecy of the glass architecture that would come to define the modern world. Close your eyes and imagine walking through that palace of light. The sun streams down through the glass roof, warm on your face. The air is filled with the murmur of thousands of visitors, the rustle of crinolines and the tap of walking sticks on the wooden floor. Above you, the iron ribs of the structure arc gracefully, supporting their burden of glass with apparent effortlessness. You have stepped into the future, a future built of transparency and light. For all of human history until the 19th century, night meant darkness. The sun set, and the world grew dim, lit only by fire, by candles and oil lamps and torches that flickered and smoked and gave off feeble light. People went to bed early because there was little else to do. Work stopped when the sun went down. Darkness was a fundamental fact of human existence. The invention of the incandescent light bulb changed everything. And at the heart of every light bulb was glass. The principle was simple enough. If you heat a thin filament of material hot enough, it glows, producing light. But there was a problem. At the temperatures needed to produce bright light, most materials would burn, combining with the oxygen in the air and quickly disintegrating. The filament needed to be enclosed in an environment without oxygen, and that environment needed to be transparent so the light could escape. Glass was the answer. A glass bulb could be evacuated of air, creating a vacuum, or filled with an inert gas that would not react with the hot filament. Glass was transparent, allowing the light to pass through unimpeded. Glass could be shaped into bulbs of any size, sealed tight against the outside air, fitted with metal bases that conducted electricity to the filament within. Thomas Edison in America and Joseph Swan in England both developed practical incandescent bulbs in the late 1870s. Their designs were similar, a carbonized filament inside an evacuated glass bulb, connected to a source of electrical current. When the current flowed, the filament heated, and light poured forth, steady and bright and controllable. The impact was transformative. Electric light was brighter than any flame, and it did not flicker or smoke. It could be turned on and off with a switch. It did not consume oxygen or produce dangerous fumes. It was safer than gas lighting, which had killed countless people through explosions and asphyxiation. Within decades, electric light had spread across the developed world, banishing the ancient darkness that had ruled the night since the beginning of time. The glass light bulb did not merely illuminate rooms. It transformed cities, it transformed society, it transformed what it meant to be human in the modern world. Consider what electric light made possible. Factories could operate around the clock, their workers laboring through the night under bright artificial illumination. Streets could be lit safely, allowing people to move about after dark without fear. Shops could display their wares in brilliantly lit windows, creating the spectacle of the modern shopping district. Entertainment venues could operate into the small hours, and cities that never slept began to emerge. The glass bulb multiplied. Streetlights marched down avenues and boulevards. Neon signs blazed with colored light, their glass tubes bent into letters and shapes, filled with glowing gas. Theater marquees sparkled with hundreds of bulbs, drawing crowds to the latest shows. The night sky above great cities began to glow with reflected artificial light, a dome of luminosity that blotted out the stars. We live now in a world that would be unrecognizable to our ancestors, a world where darkness is optional, where night can be banished at the flip of a switch. We read and work and play long after sunset, our activities no longer dictated by the movement of the sun. We have extended the day into the night, colonized the darkness with artificial suns enclosed in fragile shells of glass. Think about the light around you now, as you drift toward sleep. Perhaps a bedside lamp casts its warm glow. Perhaps the distant lights of a city paint a faint luminescence on your ceiling. Perhaps the small indicator lights of electronic devices dot the darkness like tiny stars. All of this light passes through glass, shaped and directed and made possible by the same material that ancient craftspeople used to make beads and bottles. And now, as you prepare for sleep, perhaps you will turn off that light. You will flip a switch or press a button, and the current will stop flowing and the filament will cool and darkness will return. But it is a chosen darkness, a comfortable darkness, a darkness that you control. The light waits inside its glass shell, ready to banish the night again whenever you wish. This too is a gift of glass, this mastery over darkness, this power over the ancient rhythms of day and night. As the 20th century dawned, a new invention began to transform the world. The automobile, once a curiosity for the wealthy, was becoming a practical means of transportation. Henry Ford's assembly lines made cars affordable for ordinary families. Roads were being paved and improved. A new age of mobility was beginning. But automobiles posed new challenges for glass. Early cars were open to the elements, their passengers exposed to wind and rain and dust. Windshields were added to protect drivers, but ordinary glass was dangerous. In an accident, it shattered into sharp, jagged shards that caused terrible injuries. The very glass meant to protect could become a deadly weapon. The solution came from an unexpected direction. In 1903, a French chemist named Edouard Benedictus accidentally knocked a glass flask from a shelf. It fell to the floor but did not shatter. The flask had contained a solution of cellulose nitrate, which had evaporated and left a thin plastic film coating the inside of the glass. This film held the broken pieces together. Benedictus recognized the potential immediately. He developed a process for laminating glass, sandwiching a layer of plastic between two sheets of glass. When this laminated glass broke, the plastic held the fragments in place, preventing them from flying into dangerous projectiles. He called his invention triplex, and it would save countless lives. Laminated safety glass was first used in gas mask lenses during World War I, protecting soldiers' eyes from shattered glass as well as from gas. After the war, it found its true calling in automobile windshields. By the 1930s, most cars were equipped with laminated windshields that would crack but not shatter, that would absorb impact rather than transmit it, that would keep passengers safe even in terrible crashes. The automobile transformed glass just as glass transformed the automobile. As cars became faster and more enclosed, they required ever more sophisticated glass. Curved windshields that wrapped around the driver's field of vision. Tempered glass for side and rear windows. Glass that had been heat-treated to shatter into small, relatively harmless pebbles rather than sharp shards. Tinted glass to reduce glare and keep interiors cool. The car became a glass cocoon, a transparent shell that carried its passengers through the world while protecting them from it. You could see the landscape flowing past, watch the clouds above, observe the other travelers on the road, all while remaining safe and comfortable inside your bubble of glass and metal. The windshield became a screen through which modern life was viewed, a frame for the endless movie of the highway. Think about how much of your life is seen through automotive glass. The commute to work, the drive to the store, the long journey to visit family in distant cities. The world slides past your windshield like a dream, forests and fields, cities and suburbs, mountains and plains. You are there and not there, present in the landscape yet separated from it by a thin, transparent barrier. The automobile also demanded new kinds of glass for its lights, headlamps that could illuminate the road ahead, their beams shaped and focused by glass lenses, taillights and turn signals, colored glass that communicated the driver's intentions to those behind, rear-view mirrors that showed the road already traveled. Glass became the car's eyes, its means of seeing and being seen. By the mid-20th century, the automobile had become central to modern life, at least in the developed world. And glass was central to the automobile surrounding drivers in a transparent envelope, illuminating their path, protecting them from the elements and from the consequences of their own speed. The same material that had once made precious beads for ancient queens now enabled millions of ordinary people to travel at speeds that would have seemed miraculous to their grandparents. Let yourself drift now down an imaginary highway. The sun is setting ahead of you, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that glow through your windshield. The road stretches out toward the horizon, a ribbon of possibility. Other cars pass in the opposite direction, their headlights beginning to flicker on as the light fades. Inside your glass-enclosed space, you are safe, warm, moving effortlessly through a world that your ancestors could only have crossed on foot. This is what glass has given us, this freedom of movement, this ability to traverse vast distances while remaining comfortable and protected. Sleep now and dream of the open road. In the late 19th century, a new kind of building began to rise in American cities. The skyscraper, made possible by steel frame construction and the elevator, thrust upward into the sky, reaching heights that would have been unthinkable a generation before. And as these buildings grew taller, architects began to reimagine the role of glass in their designs. Traditional buildings were held up by their walls. The walls bore the weight of the floors above, and this limited how tall a building could be. But steel frame construction changed everything. Now the building skeleton, its frame of steel columns and beams, carried all the weight. The walls became mere curtains, enclosing the space but supporting nothing. And if the walls supported nothing, they could be made of anything, even glass. The idea of the glass curtain wall emerged gradually. Early skyscrapers still had massive stone facades, their steel frames hidden behind traditional materials. But visionary architects began to dream of buildings that would express their true nature, buildings where the glass skin would reveal rather than conceal the structure beneath. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, a German architect who would become one of the most influential designers of the 20th century, sketched his vision of glass skyscrapers in the early 1920s. His drawings showed towers of pure glass, their facades reflecting the sky and the city around them, their interiors flooded with light. These buildings were too radical to be built at the time, but they planted a seed that would eventually transform the skylines of the world. The technology needed to catch up to the vision. Glass strong enough to withstand wind loads at great heights. Systems to control the heat gain from all that sunlight pouring through. Methods to seal the glass against rain and cold. It took decades of development, but by the middle of the 20th century, the glass curtain wall had become a practical reality. In 1952, Lever House rose on Park Avenue in New York City, and the age of the glass skyscraper truly began. Designed by the firm of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, Lever House was clad almost entirely in blue-green glass and stainless steel. It was sleek and modern, a crystalline slab that seemed to float above the street. Nothing like it had ever been built before. Lever House was followed by the Seagram Building, completed in 1958, designed by Mies van der Rohe himself. Here was the realization of those sketches from decades before. A tower of bronze-tinted glass rising with perfect proportions from a granite plaza. The Seagram Building became perhaps the most influential office building ever constructed, its design copied and adapted in cities around the world. The glass tower became the symbol of corporate modernity. Banks and insurance companies, law firms and multinational corporations, all wanted their own towers of glass, their own gleaming monuments to commerce and progress. City after city saw its skyline transformed, the old masonry buildings dwarfed by new glass giants that reflected the clouds and each other in endless shimmering patterns. By the end of the 20th century, the glass curtain wall had spread across the globe. From New York to Shanghai, from London to Dubai, glass towers rose into the sky, their facades catching the sun by day and glowing with interior light by night. The skylines of modern cities became forests of glass, vertical landscapes that would have astonished the builders of the Crystal Palace. Think about the cities you have seen, the glass towers that define their silhouettes against the sky. Each of those buildings contains thousands of panes of glass, each one a descendant of those first crude window panes that Roman craftsmen made 2,000 years ago. The scale has changed beyond recognition, but the essential magic remains the same. Sand transformed by fire into a material that lets light pass while keeping out the wind and rain. Let your mind rise now, up the face of a glass tower, floor after floor of gleaming windows reflecting the sunset. Inside, people work at desks bathed in natural light. Outside, the city spreads to the horizon, a tapestry of streets and buildings and parks. You are high above it all, suspended in a box of glass, seeing the world from a perspective that no previous generation could have imagined. This is what glass has built, these towers in the sky, these monuments to human ambition encased in walls of light. While architects were dreaming of glass towers, engineers were solving a more fundamental problem. How do you make large quantities of perfectly flat, perfectly clear glass, cheaply enough for ordinary buildings and ordinary people? The old methods were still in use. Plate glass was cast and rolled, then ground and polished to remove imperfections. Sheet glass was drawn upward from a pool of molten material, producing glass that was flat but often rippled and distorted. Both methods were expensive and produced glass of inconsistent quality. The world needed a better way. The solution came from an English company called Pilkington and from an engineer named Alastair Pilkington, who happened to share the company's name though he was not related to the founding family. In the 1950s, Alastair Pilkington developed a process that would revolutionize glassmaking, a process so elegant and so effective that it would eventually become the standard method for producing flat glass worldwide. The process was called float glass, and its principle was beautifully simple. Molten glass was poured onto a bath of molten tin. Because the glass was lighter than the tin, it floated on the surface, spreading out into a perfectly flat ribbon. The tin was kept at a temperature that allowed the glass to remain soft enough to level itself, but cool enough to begin solidifying. As the ribbon of glass moved along the bath, it gradually cooled and hardened, emerging at the far end as a continuous sheet of perfect flatness. The genius of the float process was that gravity did the work. No grinding was needed, no polishing, no mechanical flattening. The glass simply settled into flatness under its own weight, seeking the level surface that nature always seeks. The result was glass of unprecedented quality, with parallel surfaces and optical clarity that no previous method could match. Pilkington spent 7 years perfecting the process, investing millions of pounds and enduring countless failures before achieving consistent results. The company kept the technology secret as long as it could, but eventually licensed it to glassmakers around the world. Today, virtually all flat glass is made by the float process, from the windows in your home to the facades of the tallest skyscrapers. The float glass revolution transformed the economics of windows. Suddenly, large panes of perfect glass were affordable for everyone. Picture windows became standard in suburban homes, bringing the outdoors inside, framing views of gardens and streets. Sliding glass doors opened onto patios and decks, blurring the boundary between interior and exterior space. And the glass kept improving. Double glazing, 2 panes of glass with an insulating gap between them, dramatically reduced heat loss through windows. Low emissivity coatings, invisible metallic layers applied to the glass surface, reflected heat back into the room while still allowing light to pass. Smart glass that could change from transparent to opaque at the flip of a switch. Self-cleaning glass coated with materials that broke down dirt in sunlight. Modern windows are technological marvels, though we rarely think of them that way. They insulate against cold and heat. They block harmful ultraviolet radiation while admitting visible light. They reduce noise from the outside world. They can be made strong enough to resist hurricanes or bullets. They are so clear that birds sometimes fly into them, unable to see the barrier that separates them from the space beyond. Think about the windows in your own home. Perhaps you are near one now, as you listen to these words. The glass admits the light but keeps out the weather. It lets you see the world while protecting you from it. It is so ordinary, so ubiquitous, that you probably never think about it at all. And yet, it is the culmination of 5,000 years of human ingenuity, a material that ancient glassmakers could never have imagined, produced by processes they could never have understood. The window is a technology of connection and separation. Through it, we observe the world while remaining apart from it. We watch the rain fall without getting wet. We see the snow pile up while staying warm. We witness the drama of storms and sunsets from positions of perfect safety. Glass has given us this privilege, this ability to be present to the world without being exposed to it. Rest now and feel the protection that your windows provide. Outside, the world continues its endless business. Wind blowing, temperatures rising and falling. The sun traversing its arc across the sky. Inside, you are sheltered, comfortable, at peace. The glass stands guard, invisible and silent, performing its ancient magic of letting light pass while keeping everything else at bay. This is the gift that glass gives us every day, in every building around the world. Glass has always been a material that interacts with light, letting it pass, bending it, reflecting it, coloring it. But in the second half of the 20th century, scientists and engineers found a way to make glass do something new with light. They learned to trap it, to guide it, to send it racing through thin strands of glass over vast distances. They invented fiber optics, and in doing so, they transformed how the world communicates. The principle behind fiber optics had been known for over a century. Light entering a transparent material at a shallow angle can be totally internally reflected, bouncing off the inside surface rather than passing through. A beam of light entering one end of a glass rod can bounce its way along the rod's length, emerging at the far end even if the rod curves and bends along the way. But turning this principle into a practical technology required glass of extraordinary purity. Ordinary glass absorbs light, so a beam traveling through it grows dimmer with distance. For fiber optics to work over long distances, the glass needed to be so pure that light could travel for miles without significant loss. This was a challenge that seemed almost impossible. The breakthrough came in the 1970s, when researchers at Corning Glass Works in New York developed methods to produce glass fibers of unprecedented clarity. Their fibers were so pure that light could travel through 20 kilometers of the material, and still retain enough strength to be detected. This was the threshold needed for practical telecommunications. A fiber optic cable consists of a thin strand of ultra-pure glass, about the thickness of a human hair, surrounded by cladding of slightly different glass that reflects the light back into the core. Information is encoded in pulses of laser light, billions of pulses per second, each pulse representing a bit of data. These light signals race through the fiber at nearly the speed of light itself, carrying telephone calls, internet traffic, video streams, all the communications of our connected world. Today, vast networks of fiber optic cables span the globe. They run beneath city streets and along railway lines. They cross continents and dive beneath the oceans, lying on the seafloor thousands of meters below the waves. They connect data centers and telephone exchanges, homes and businesses, nations and continents. The modern internet runs on light through glass. Consider what happens when you send a message to someone on the other side of the world. Your words are converted into electrical signals by your device, then into pulses of light at a fiber optic node. These pulses race through glass fibers, perhaps across an ocean, through switching stations and amplifiers, until they reach their destination, where they are converted back into electrical signals and then into words on a screen. The entire journey takes a fraction of a second. This is glass at its most magical, performing a feat that would have seemed like pure sorcery to the ancient glassmakers. Light itself, captured and guided through threads of sand transformed by fire, carrying human thoughts and voices and images across the planet at speeds that abolish distance. The same material that once made simple beads now enables instantaneous communication between any 2 points on Earth. The capacity of fiber optic networks is almost beyond comprehension. A single fiber can carry trillions of bits per second. Bundles of fibers packed together in cables no. Today, vast networks of fiber optic cables span the globe. They run beneath city streets and along railway lines. They cross continents and dive beneath the oceans, lying on the seafloor thousands of meters below the waves. They connect data centers and telephone exchanges, homes and businesses, nations and continents. The modern internet runs on light through glass. Consider what happens when you send a message to someone on the other side of the world. Your words are converted into electrical signals by your device, then into pulses of light at a fiber optic node. These pulses race through glass fibers, perhaps across an ocean, through switching stations and amplifiers, until they reach their destination, where they are converted back into electrical signals and then into words on a screen. The entire journey takes a fraction of a second. This is glass at its most magical, performing a feat that would have seemed like pure sorcery to the ancient glassmakers. Light itself, captured and guided through threads of sand transformed by fire, carrying human thoughts and voices and images across the planet at speeds that abolish distance. The same material that once made simple beads now enables instantaneous communication between any 2 points on Earth. The capacity of fiber optic networks is almost beyond comprehension. A single fiber can carry trillions of bits per second. Bundles of fibers packed together in cables no. In the middle of the 20th century, a new kind of glass object began to appear in homes around the world. It was a screen, a curved face of glass that glowed with moving images, that brought the world into living rooms and changed how humanity experienced information and entertainment. The television had arrived, and at its heart was glass. The cathode ray tube, or CRT, was the technology that made television possible. Inside a glass vacuum tube, an electron gun fired beams of electrons at a phosphorescent screen. Where the electrons struck, the phosphors glowed, creating points of light. By scanning these beams across the screen in rapid patterns, the tube could create the illusion of a complete image, an image that moved and changed, that could show anything from news broadcasts to sitcoms to the first steps of astronauts on the moon. The glass of a CRT screen had to meet demanding specifications. It needed to withstand the vacuum inside the tube, which created tremendous pressure on the glass from the outside air. It needed to be thick enough to protect viewers from the X-rays generated by the electron beam. It needed to be shaped precisely to produce undistorted images. And it needed to be coated on the inside with phosphors that would glow in the right colors when struck by electrons. For decades, the CRT television dominated homes across the developed world. Families gathered around the glowing glass screen to watch programs together. Children sat transfixed by cartoons and educational shows. Adults followed the news, watching history unfold through the medium of moving light on glass. The television became a window to the world, a hearth around which families gathered, a new center of domestic life. The curved glass screen of the CRT became one of the most familiar objects in modern life. Its soft glow lit living rooms in the evening. Its hum and flicker became part of the soundtrack of daily existence. For a time, it seemed that the CRT would endure forever, this glass tube that had brought moving images into our homes. But technology never stands still, and new forms of glass screens were waiting in the wings. By the turn of the 21st century, the bulky CRT was giving way to something new. Flat panel displays, thin and light, began to replace the heavy glass tubes that had dominated for half a century. And at the heart of these new screens was a different kind of glass technology. The liquid crystal display, or LCD. Liquid crystals are strange materials, neither quite solid nor quite liquid, whose molecular structure can be changed by electric fields. When sandwiched between two sheets of glass and subjected to precisely controlled electrical signals, liquid crystals can twist and untwist, blocking or allowing light to pass through. Combined with a backlight and color filters, this effect can create images of remarkable clarity and brightness. The glass in an LCD screen is not ordinary glass. It must be extraordinarily flat and uniform, free of any imperfections that would distort the image. It must be thin enough to keep the display lightweight, yet strong enough to protect the delicate components within. It must be compatible with the complex manufacturing processes that deposit transistors and electrodes on its surface, millions of them, each one controlling a tiny portion of the image. The flat screen revolution transformed our relationship with displays. Televisions became thin enough to hang on walls like paintings. Computer monitors shed their bulk and depth. And then came the device that would put a glass screen in nearly every pocket on the planet. The smartphone. The smartphone screen is a marvel of glass engineering. It must be thin and light, yet strong enough to survive drops and impacts. It must be sensitive to the touch of a finger, yet resistant to scratches and abrasion. It must display images with brilliant colors and sharp resolution, yet consume minimal power from a small battery. Achieving all these goals required the development of entirely new types of glass. Consider the glass screen of a smartphone if you have one nearby. It is thinner than a credit card, yet it contains technologies that would have seemed like magic to glassmakers of any previous generation. Beneath your fingertip, as you swipe and tap, lies a sandwich of precisely engineered glass layers, each one performing its part in a symphony of light and touch and information. This is what glass has become in the 21st century, a material so sophisticated that we carry computers in our pockets, their interfaces made of sand transformed by human ingenuity. Glass has always been fragile. This is perhaps its most defining characteristic, the quality that makes us handle it with care, that gives the word fragile itself a glassy connotation. Drop a glass and it shatters. Strike it against something hard and it breaks. For all its beauty and usefulness, glass has always demanded gentle treatment. But why is glass fragile? The answer lies in its molecular structure. Glass is an amorphous solid, meaning its atoms are arranged in a disordered pattern, unlike the regular crystal lattices of most solids. This disorder makes glass vulnerable to cracks. When a crack forms on the surface of glass, it concentrates stress at its tip, allowing the crack to propagate easily through the material. A tiny scratch can become the starting point for a catastrophic break. Scientists and engineers have long sought ways to make glass stronger. Tempering, the process of heating glass and then cooling it rapidly, creates compressive stress on the surface that helps resist cracking. Laminating, sandwiching glass layers around plastic films, holds the pieces together even when the glass breaks. These techniques made glass safer and more durable, but they could not make it truly strong. The breakthrough came from a process called ion exchange. By immersing glass in a bath of molten potassium salt, manufacturers could replace the smaller sodium ions in the glass surface with larger potassium ions. These larger ions crowded into the spaces left by the sodium, creating powerful compressive forces in the outer layer of the glass. This compression made the glass far more resistant to cracking and breaking. Corning, the same company that had pioneered fiber optics, developed this technology into a product called Gorilla Glass. First introduced in 2007, Gorilla Glass was designed specifically for the screens of mobile devices. It was thin and light, yet remarkably resistant to scratches and impacts, could survive falls that would shatter ordinary glass. It was the material that made the smartphone revolution possible. Today, Gorilla Glass and similar strengthened glasses protect the screens of billions of devices worldwide. Every time you pull a smartphone from your pocket, every time you tap on a tablet screen, every time you glance at a smartwatch on your wrist, you are interacting with glass that has been engineered to be stronger than any glass in history. The glass keeps getting better. Each new generation of Gorilla Glass is stronger and more scratch-resistant than the last. Manufacturers have developed glasses that can survive drops onto hard surfaces from ever greater heights. They have created surfaces that resist the microscopic scratches that accumulate with daily use, keeping screens clear and pristine. They have even engineered glass with antimicrobial properties, surfaces that inhibit the growth of bacteria. The smartphone has become perhaps the most intimate object in modern life. We carry it everywhere. We touch it hundreds of times a day. We gaze into its glowing screen first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And the interface between us and this constant companion is glass, strong glass, glass that feels smooth beneath our fingertips, glass that shows us our messages and our memories, our maps and our music. Think about how remarkable this is. For 5,000 years, Glass was something to be careful with, something that would punish a moment's carelessness with sharp edges and scattered fragments. Now we carry glass in our pockets, sit on it accidentally, drop it on sidewalks and kitchen floors, and more often than not, it survives. The ancient fragility of glass has been engineered away, replaced by a toughness that our ancestors could never have imagined. And yet glass remains glass, can still break under enough force, can still crack if struck just wrong. We still feel a moment of fear when our phone slips from our grasp, still hold our breath as we pick it up to check for damage. The fragility is diminished but not eliminated, and perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps it reminds us that even our most sophisticated technologies are still made from the ancient materials of the earth, sand and fire transformed by human hands, miraculous and yet still bound by the laws of nature. Rest now, and feel the smooth glass of any device near you. Run your finger across its surface, feel its coolness, its perfect smoothness. This glass connects you to the world, shows you faces and places far away, holds your photographs and your correspondence. It is a window into the digital realm, a portal you carry with you always. And it is made of the same fundamental stuff as those first glass beads made 5,000 years ago, silicon and oxygen, arranged by heat into a form that lets light pass and images form. The material has not changed. Only our mastery of it has grown. While industry was transforming glass into high-tech materials for screens and fiber optics, something else was happening in small studios and workshops around the world. Artists were rediscovering the ancient magic of molten glass, using it not for practical purposes but for pure creative expression. The studio glass movement was bringing glass back to its roots as a material of beauty and wonder. The movement began in the early 1960s, when an American ceramicist named Harvey Littleton began experimenting with glassblowing outside the factory setting. Working with a chemist named Dominic Labino, Littleton developed small furnaces that individual artists could use in their own studios. For the first time, glass became a medium for independent artistic creation, freed from the industrial context that had dominated for centuries. The studio glass movement spread rapidly. Artists explored the unique properties of molten glass, its fluidity, its responsiveness to gravity and breath, its ability to capture light in ways no other material could match. They created sculptures and vessels, installations, and architectural elements. They pushed the boundaries of what glass could do, developing new techniques and discovering new possibilities. Dale Chihuly became perhaps the most famous of these glass artists, known for his monumental installations of brilliantly colored blown glass. His works fill museum lobbies and botanical gardens, cascading assemblages of organic forms that seem to glow with inner light. Other artists took different paths, creating minimalist geometric forms, or delicate figurative works, or abstract expressions of color and light. The ancient techniques survive alongside the new. On the island of Murano, glassblowers still work much as their ancestors did 500 years ago, shaping molten glass with breath and hand and simple tools. Their furnaces burn through the night, and the glow of hot glass still lights their workshops. They make chandeliers and goblets, sculptures and jewelry, carrying forward a tradition that stretches back through the centuries. There is something about glass that speaks to the human spirit in ways that are difficult to articulate. Perhaps it is the way glass captures and transforms light, creating colors that seem to come from another world. Perhaps it is the delicate balance between beauty and fragility, the knowledge that something so lovely can be destroyed in an instant. Perhaps it is the ancient alchemy of it, the transformation of common sand into something transcendent. Glass art reminds us of truths that our practical age sometimes forgets. That beauty matters, that craftsmanship matters, that there is value in creating things that serve no purpose other than to delight the eye and lift the spirit. In a world of mass production and disposable goods, the unique glass object, shaped by an individual artist's vision and skill, stands as a testament to human creativity. And glass art connects us to our ancestors in a profound way. When a contemporary artist gathers molten glass on the end of a blowpipe, they are performing essentially the same actions that glassworkers performed 2,000 years ago. The tools have changed little. The fundamental dance of heat and breath and gravity remains the same. In the glow of the furnace, past and present merge. Perhaps you have seen glass art in a museum or gallery, in a public space or a private collection. Perhaps you have watched a glassblower at work, the hypnotic rhythm of gathering and shaping, the bloom of color as the hot glass catches the light. There is a meditative quality to watching glass being made, a sense of witnessing something ancient and elemental, fire and breath and human skill combining to create beauty. As you drift toward sleep, let your mind fill with the colors of glass. Deep cobalt blue, like the depths of the sea at twilight. Ruby red, warm as embers, rich as wine. Emerald green, cool and mysterious. Amber and gold, the colors of honey and autumn leaves. These colors have been captured in glass for millennia, and they continue to captivate us, to move something deep within our souls that responds to beauty. Sleep now, surrounded by the idea of glass in all its forms. The practical and the beautiful, the ancient and the modern, the industrial and the artistic. From the first crude beads made in Mesopotamian workshops to the smartphone screen glowing softly on your nightstand, glass has accompanied humanity on its long journey through history. It has shown us the stars and the cells of our bodies. It has protected us from the elements and connected us across oceans. It has captured light and released it in new forms. It is one of our oldest companions and one of our most faithful servants. Glass, simple, complex, fragile, strong. The gift of fire and sand, transformed by human imagination into endless wonder. As we near the end of our journey through the history of glass, let us turn our gaze forward, toward the horizons of possibility. What will glass become in the years and decades ahead? What new wonders will emerge from this ancient material? The future is always uncertain, but we can glimpse the directions in which glass is evolving, and they are remarkable indeed. Scientists are developing glass that can heal itself. Imagine a cracked screen that repairs its own damage over time, the molecular bonds reforming, the fractures slowly disappearing. This is not fantasy. Researchers have created glasses with special polymers that can flow into cracks and rebond, restoring the material's integrity. The self-healing screen may one day become reality. Glass is becoming smart in ways that go beyond mere strength. Electrochromic glass can change from transparent to opaque at the touch of a button, providing privacy or shade on demand. Windows that darken automatically in bright sunlight, then clear again as clouds pass, are already being installed in buildings and aircraft. The passive window is becoming an active, responsive element of our environment. Researchers are exploring glass that can generate electricity. Transparent solar cells, embedded in window glass, could turn every building into a power plant, harvesting energy from sunlight while still allowing views and daylight. The skyscrapers of the future might power themselves through their glass skins, their facades becoming vast solar collectors that generate clean energy. And glass is finding new roles in medicine. Bioactive glasses can bond with living bone, helping fractures heal. Glass microspheres can deliver drugs to precisely targeted locations in the body. Glass optical fibers can carry light into the body for diagnosis and treatment. The same material that lets us see the world is now helping us heal the body. The future of glass is also a future of sustainability. Glassmakers are working to reduce the energy needed to melt glass, to use more recycled material, to create products that last longer and leave smaller footprints. Glass is infinitely recyclable, able to be melted and remade without loss of quality. In a world seeking sustainable materials, glass has advantages that are only beginning to be fully appreciated. Perhaps the most remarkable future for glass lies beyond our planet. As humanity begins to venture outward into the solar system, glass will go with us, just as it has accompanied every step of our journey through history. The great telescopes that search for planets around distant stars rely on mirrors of precisely shaped glass, their surfaces accurate to within a fraction of the wavelength of light. The James Webb Space Telescope, orbiting far from Earth, carries mirrors of beryllium coated with gold. But future space telescopes may use new forms of glass, engineered for the extreme conditions of space. When humans establish permanent bases on the Moon or Mars, they will need windows to see the alien landscapes around them, windows that can withstand the vacuum of space and the radiation that streams from the sun. They will need glass for their helmets and their laboratories, for their greenhouses where they will grow food under artificial light. Glass will be essential to human survival beyond Earth. And here is a beautiful thought to carry with you towards sleep. The Moon and Mars are covered with a substance called regolith, a layer of fine particles created by billions of years of meteor impacts. This regolith contains silicon dioxide, the same basic material from which all glass is made. Future settlers might manufacture glass from local materials, melting lunar or Martian sand to create windows and containers, continuing a tradition that began in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. Imagine, someday, a craftsperson on Mars, working in a small studio, shaping glass made from Martian sand. The sun, smaller and dimmer than it appears from Earth, shines through a window of locally made glass. Outside, the red landscape stretches to the horizon. Inside, the warm glow of molten glass, the same glow that has lit workshops for 5,000 years. The tradition continues, on another world, carried by human hands to the stars. Glass has been our companion through all of human history. It will be our companion in whatever future we create. From the first crude beads shaped by ancient hands to the spacecraft that carry us to other worlds, glass endures, adapts, evolves. It is one of humanity's oldest technologies, and it will be among the last we abandon, if we ever do. Where humans go, glass goes with us. We have traveled far together, you and I, through 5,000 years of human history. We have watched glass emerge from the furnaces of ancient Mesopotamia, spread through Egypt and the Mediterranean, transform in the workshops of Venice, and conquer the modern world. We have seen glass shape science and art, architecture and communication. And now, as our journey draws to a close, let us pause to appreciate just how thoroughly glass has woven itself into our lives. Look around you wherever you are. Count the glass objects you can see, the windows that let in light, the screen you may be watching or the device playing these words, the light fixtures overhead, the mirrors in the bathroom, the lenses in eyeglasses or cameras, the bottles and jars in your kitchen, the glass in your car if you have one, the glass in the buildings you can see outside. Glass is everywhere, and yet we rarely see it. It is the most visible of materials and the most invisible. It surrounds us constantly, yet we look right through it, our eyes focused on what lies beyond. We live in a world of glass, and we scarcely notice the glass itself, only what it reveals and protects and enables. This invisibility is, in a way, the highest tribute to glass. It has become so perfectly integrated into our lives that we take it completely for granted. We do not think about windows when we look out of them. We do not think about screens when we read from them. We do not think about lenses when we see through them. Glass has achieved the ultimate success of any technology. It has disappeared into usefulness. And yet glass is remarkable, truly remarkable. Consider what it does. It lets us see things we could never see with our eyes alone, from distant galaxies to microscopic cells. It lets us capture and transmit light in ways that would seem magical to our ancestors. It protects us from weather and danger while letting us remain connected to the world. It carries our voices and data across oceans and continents at the speed of light. No other material does so much in so many ways so quietly and reliably. The history of glass is not finished. It continues with every new innovation, every new application, every new object that emerges from the furnaces and laboratories of today. The story we have told tonight is only the beginning, or perhaps the middle, of a much longer tale that will unfold across centuries and millennia to come. Somewhere tonight, a glassblower is shaping molten glass, just as glassblowers have done for 2,000 years. Somewhere tonight, an engineer is developing a new type of glass for a purpose we cannot yet imagine. Somewhere tonight, an artist is creating beauty from this ancient material, adding to the long tradition of human creativity expressed through fire and sand. And somewhere tonight, a child is pressing their hand against a window, looking out at the world beyond, not knowing that the transparent barrier beneath their palm is one of humanity's greatest achievements, a material that took 5,000 years to develop, that connects them to ancient craftspeople and future astronauts, that is as ordinary as air and as extraordinary as starlight. Glass is a story of human ingenuity, of our endless drive to understand and transform the world around us. It is a story of accidents and discoveries, of secrets kept and shared, of art and science intertwined. It is a story that began with fire and sand and will continue as long as humans continue to create and build and dream. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of glass. I hope it has given you a new appreciation for this remarkable material, this silent companion that surrounds us every day. The next time you look through a window, or pick up your phone, or see light sparkling through a glass of water, perhaps you will remember some of what we have shared tonight. Perhaps you will think of the ancient craftspeople who first coaxed glass from fire and feel connected, across the centuries, to their wonder and their skill. And now, as we reach the end of our time together, let yourself sink deeper into comfort and rest. The history of glass has accompanied you through the evening, a story of transformation and light, of human creativity spanning millennia. Let that story settle into your mind like sand settling through water, drifting gently down, coming to rest in the quiet depths of memory. Your body is heavy and warm. Your breath is slow and easy. The world outside your window, seen through glass, grows quiet with the night. Stars appear in the sky, their light traveling for years to reach your eyes. The same light that ancient glassmakers saw, the same light that future generations will see from windows on distant worlds. Glass connects us across time. The techniques we use today evolved from techniques developed centuries ago. The glass in your window is cousin to the glass in Roman villas, to the glass in medieval cathedrals, to the glass in Venetian mirrors and Victorian greenhouses. When you touch glass, you touch history, a continuous thread of human knowledge and skill stretching back to the first craftspeople who learned to transform sand with fire. Let your eyes close now if they are not already closed. Behind your eyelids, you might see the colors of glass, the deep blue of ancient beads, the ruby red of cathedral windows, the soft green of old bottle glass, the pure clarity of modern crystal. These colors have no sharp edges, no demands. They simply glow softly, like the memories of light. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you will walk through a world of glass. Towers of light rising around you, windows opening onto impossible vistas, lenses revealing hidden wonders, fiber optic threads carrying whispered secrets across the darkness. It is a beautiful world, this world that glass has helped us build, and you are part of it, connected to every human who has ever held a glass object in their hands and marveled at its magic. Sleep now, sleep well. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will see the world through glass again, through windows and screens and lenses. You will be surrounded by this ancient material, this gift of fire and sand, this testament to human ingenuity. But you will see it, perhaps, with new eyes. You will know its story, or at least a part of its story. And that knowledge will be a small light you carry with you, a connection to the past and the future, a reminder of how remarkable the ordinary can be. Good night. Dream of glass and light, of ancient workshops and future worlds, of the endless human journey of discovery and creation. Dream of sand becoming crystal, of fire becoming beauty, of simple things becoming extraordinary through the alchemy of human hands and human minds. Good night from Sleepy History Facts. May your rest be peaceful, and may you wake refreshed and ready to see the world anew. The history of glass will be waiting for you. In every window, every screen, every gleam of light on a transparent surface. It is a story without end, and you are part of it. Good night.